We have a splendid webinar here for you this afternoon, this evening. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. We've got a huge number of people coming online. We're about to go over 100. We expect quite a few more to join. Your chair for this evening is going to be Caroline Lucas, but before she takes over, we are going to quickly see the Climate Majority Project's latest film together. I say latest because they've been coming thick and fast recently. This one is called Britain Speaks. It is created and directed by Guy Ducker. Guy, will you take just a moment to tell us something about the film before we get to see it?
Yes, it's a film that I'd written some time ago as a sort of response to the growing sense of absurdity that since we've moved from climate denialism to climate delayism, the denialism sort of felt like it was scientifically stupid, but was at least emotionally coherent, whereas delayism, where we have an emergency on hand and everyone's saying, yes, we should definitely discuss this. Third week in June, maybe? Anyhow, so yeah, it sort of seemed like a sort of subject for a sort of satirical approach. And I was looking for a home for the film and not finding anywhere. But then I happened to be filming Liam Kavanagh for a different project, and well, actually no, I think it was for Safer, and yeah, he was talking about the whole wartime mobilisation thing, and yeah, it clicked. I thought, aha, this might be the place for this film, and yeah, and here it is.
Britain Speaks. Could you tell us your views on the possible war with Germany?
I don't think it will come to anything. If Herr Hitler wishes to go up against the might of the British Empire, well, good luck to him. The danger has been greatly overstated.
There's gun emplacements in the park, there's landing craft defences on the beaches, it's just not necessary. And there's such an eyesore.
I'm a socialist, so I am all for fighting fascism, but you know what I see with rationing and conscription? Well, they'll say that we're all in this together, but this will have a disproportionate effect on the working man.
Climate change is real. It's worrying. But we've got science on our side. I think the danger has been overstated.
We've got wind farms in the hills, we've got fields of solar panels. Do we really need them? They're such an eyesore.
Yeah, I mean, we should definitely fight global warming, but you know, scrapping petrol cars and like forcing everyone to have heat pumps, I mean, it's going to have a massive effect on working people.
Thanks so much for that, and we'll be putting links in the chat to the film, and hoping that you will you enjoyed it and that you'll want to share it. Caroline, over to you to host the webinar proper.
Thanks so much, Rupert, and welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar. I am very honoured to be chairing this session, and I just want to explain to you the way it's going to work, and then I'm going to say just a couple of words of introduction myself, and then we'll hear from Liam about the report. So just in terms of structure, as I say, I'll make a few opening comments. I'll hand over to the author of the report, Liam Kavanagh, who's the co-director with Rupert of the Climate Majority Project. And after the report has been introduced, then we're going to have 3 responses. And I will introduce the people who will make those responses when we get to that point. But then there'll be a bit of discussion between them, and then plenty of time for questions from you. And if you can put questions into the main chat, that would be fantastic. And we'll be monitoring that, and then we can put those questions to the wider panel when we get to that point on the agenda. But I guess simply by way of a few words of introduction, I wanted to congratulate the Climate Majority Project on what I think is an incredibly timely report, which essentially is seeking to answer the question, what is it that is stopping change happening? As graph after graph shows us crashing through safer thresholds, it feels like that question couldn't be more urgent. In other words, how do we turn the alarm that more and more people are undoubtedly feeling into action and mobilization? And I think it's very clear that the reason that we're not acting is not because somehow we lack sufficient knowledge or sufficient data or the best technology or even the right amount of money. You know, we have what we need, but instead of acting, it just seems as if we spend all of our time, you know, checking that data and do we need an extra bit of information before this happens or that happens? We risk going down in history as the species that spent all of its time monitoring its own extinction rather than taking active steps to avoid it. And so this report, I think, proposes some answers to that overwhelming question. It's the same question for those people who remember that amazing film, The Age of Stupid, which was about 10 years ago. Pete Postlethwaite was the actor, the amazing actor who played the lone survivor in 2050, I think it was, after some climate catastrophe. And he looks back at real news and weather reports from kind of now and says in words that still make the hairs go up on the back of my neck when I say them, why is it, knowing what we knew then, we didn't act while we still had time? So what you're going to hear from Liam in just a moment, the author of the report being launched tonight, is some of the answers to why isn't it that we aren't acting and what can we do about it? And of course, the first reason, in a sense, I think, is around the ability to face the truth. First of all, to hear the truth, to have the truth being told rather than being censored, but then actually being able to rise to the challenge of really hearing what that truth is. XR was demanding that 7 years ago. The Green Party has been demanding it for decades, but we recognize that unless we have the courage and, crucially, the emotional support we need to be able to face the truth head on, then we're hardly off the starting line. As the report makes clear, we're more likely to gain the necessary courage to face that truth when we're part of something that feels big enough that can respond meaningfully, by which I mean commensurately, to the scale of the challenge, and crucially, when we have the emotional support that is so essential if we're to look at where we're at right now with honesty and clear-sightedness. And those preconditions are what's necessary, I think, to equip us to do not just what's currently deemed to be politically possible, but more importantly, to do what is scientifically necessary. And that means we need to stretch the very definition of the possible. So we need to face the facts, and it's a whole lot easier to do that when we recognize that in doing so, we are a majority. And as a majority, we need to become self-aware of ourselves as a majority. And that's when we start having the potential, at least, to get organized. There were global media campaigns a couple of months ago, you might have seen, suggesting that globally, 89% actually do want stronger climate action. And I think it's time that everyone acted as if that were the case. And the first place to start that action, in a way, I think, is in our schools, because that is where young people have the opportunity, first of all, to really understand the nature of the challenges we face, but also, crucially, to have the emotional support that they need in order to be able to hear it, to respond to it, to process the grief that goes alongside it. And therefore, one of the main tasks of the Climate Majority campaign is to make emotionally grounded climate education mandatory, giving young people support and agency so that the knowledge that they receive then can be translated into motivation and action. And one of the things I appreciate most about the report is that in asking these questions about what are the obstacles to our action is the idea that we do move away, as I've said, from just assuming that what is the problem is some kind of information deficit. If only we had a bit more information and data, we'd be able to take action. And those thoughts, I have to say, did come to the fore a few weeks ago at the National Emergency Briefing. For those people who were aware of that briefing, an amazing meeting in London at the Central Hall, some of the most brilliant minds and scientists in the country, maybe in the world, actually giving these really powerful presentations. And I don't mean to detract from what they did one iota. It was so powerful. But it did strike me in a sense that in a way it was still playing to that paradigm of suggesting that what's missing is information. And if they would just produce the information more clearly and more powerfully, then that will be enough. It is essential, but it's not enough. Yes, we need to hear the truth, the latest truth. And it is essential that we hear it from the very best experts. And that's what we had the privilege of being able to do a few weeks ago. But what was missing, I think, was how do we hear it? How do we have the courage and the imagination to believe that a different future is even possible? How do we believe that we ourselves could make a difference? And for that, we need the scientists, but we also need the artists and the poets and the musicians and the psychologists and the educationalists. So all of that is part of what is at the heart of this report, I think. And just the last thing to say about it, and this may well be where Liam starts, I'm not sure, I can't remember. But one of the key points, I think, is recognizing that climate adaptation gives us a real opportunity to engage with people in potentially a more meaningful way than simply talking about climate mitigation and decarbonisation. Now, those two things go hand in hand, and we are not for a moment saying that we shouldn't keep our attention on getting our emissions down, obviously. But for as long as we're only talking about decarbonisation and not about adapting to the climate catastrophe that's already baked into the situation that we face it right now, then we lose an opportunity to give people real agency at a local level, to really see themselves as part of this majority that is coming together to make tangible improvements in their everyday lives. And for many people for whom this is not their main concern and who probably wouldn't be joining a seminar like this, in a sense, being able to demonstrate that people can come together in their communities and make stronger communities. And this isn't just about being lectured about net zero, it's about better lives, better quality of lives right now in local communities. That can be the glue that holds communities together and can make a real difference. So on that note, let me hand over to Liam now to take us through the report in more detail. Liam, over to you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was great. With no further ado, I will present the report with a few adjustments based on one of the responses I've gotten in social media to make it interesting for people who've already read it. The National Emergency Briefing has grabbed attention recently with an effort to reset the conversation on environmental breakdown. MPs were briefed by scientists on dire climate realities, while the public was already quietly alarmed. Climate is just one very good reason why most people feel our society seems headed towards self-destruction. But still, we're not mobilized for change. National emergency only feels real when the majority actually starts taking action. Tonight, I'd like to discuss some concrete steps that the majority could realistically take, which would build the sense that a mobilization is really beginning. The specific proposals that I discussed might not on their face seem radical enough for some people, but what is radical about them is two things. As Carolyn said, they work to create environments in which people can turn truth into motivation, rather than being told as much truth as leaders or anybody else thinks they can handle. And secondly, their departure from radicalism as usual and pragmatism as usual, I think is notable. Too often, pragmatism is a euphemism for taking only the actions needed to stay in power. Keir Starmer's government is an example. Radicalism is too often a euphemism for insisting that we change everything, but with little attention paid to the political realities of change. As Roberto Unger said, we need something in between, a series of practical steps with vision that take us not to utopia, but somewhere very different and better than where we are right now. As Martin Luther King said, the idealists are usually not realistic, and the realists are usually not idealistic. Truth is found in an emergent synthesis that reconciles the two. So my invitation at the outset is this. Imagine that in the last year, we already took the actions that I'm about to discuss. A national adaptation plan, serious climate education, an awakening of the voice of the silent majority, and honesty about the failures of international institutions have been done. How would you feel about our prospects of averting the worst now? And how radical would that feel in comparison to the way that any other year previously had ended in recent memory? The actions that I'll discuss can create these 4 simple conditions of mobilization, which Carolyn's already presaged. First, people have to know the truth. In this case, that breakdown is happening, climate breakdown is happening. Feel they can do something about it. Third, feel that their action is part of something big enough to make a meaningful change. Fourth, all of us together must deal with the emotions that come if the first 3 factors are not completely in place. Right now, we doubt that our collective efforts are enough. So denial and overwhelm result. When at the beginning of the First World War or the Second World War, it was doubted whether efforts were enough. It was understood that we would face an inner challenge. We need to accept the inner challenge instead of denying it. What climate actions can involve larger numbers than ever before, building the sense that a movement large enough to make a difference is forming, helping us to feel that we're enough? What actions can support us through those doubts? So what I'm thinking of here is, remember that Zoran Mamdani's only been elected a mayor recently, and Zach Polanski's polled at 17%. Yet those visible victories are justifiably international news. They're heightening our sense of what's possible. How can climate action add to that sense? But one thing right away is strategic adaptation. The adaptation era is here. Global temperatures have risen to the 1.5 degrees sea level, past which science has long warned us new levels of climate chaos await. The need to protect ourselves from tangible consequences will motivate people in a way that temperature targets have not. That means preparing for food shortages, fires, and floods while increasing community cohesion. This kind of action could be part of a full engagement with the global reality of climate change, or it could, especially in rich countries, be part of an attempt to save business as usual. We can just try to control and offset climate chaos through flood walls, fusion-powered air conditioning, and the like. Strategic adaptation, what CMP is advocating, targets not just causes, but also the effects of climate chaos. Strategic adaptation understands that nobody can reduce their emissions enough to make their community safer, but everybody can adapt enough to make their community safer, though not safe. No amount of adaptation can offset the worst effects of climate change, such as the breakdown of the Atlantic currents that warm Britain, or the hothouse Earth scenarios that could literally kill billions. Decarbonization remains essential. As community adaptation spreads across Britain and the world, millions, even billions, can feel that they're not alone, but part of something large enough to make a difference, even about the source of the problem, not just carbon emissions, but our economic system. Adaptation efforts also create emotionally supportive groups at the community level. And of course, there'll be some who tell us that we can control climate chaos. Those will be the same people who denied the crisis in the first place, and we can't let them shape our efforts to respond to it. Communities and organizations across the UK are providing examples of strategic adaptation. And also in the world, together with such communities, we aim to pressure our governments to adopt truly serious national climate resilience plans. We need to talk about adaptation because the loss and damages faced across the world, and especially in the global south, can't be fully discussed while we pretend that all consequences are still avoidable. The countries that created the problem cannot be allowed to delay a response by pretending the problem can be erased. We can change mentalities by getting on with adaptation. So another thing that true emergency obviously entails is preparing our young people for what's coming. 400,000 young people leave school every year. And that's a population that, if prepared, could soon create change. Young people are the most deeply climate concerned of us, and so need the most attention. And classrooms are a perfect place to help them understand what they face, what they can do, that they're part of a global majority of concerned people, and how to deal with the emotions that result from wondering whether that majority is enough. Climate Courage Schools, which is a CMP initiative, has called alongside groups of students, teachers, head teachers, and parents for exactly that type of preparation. What that looks like practically is making climate and emotional literacy a core expectation of teaching, requiring school leaders to prioritize Earth crisis learning in schools, supporting schools to become community adaptation hubs where adaptation at the community can take root, and helping schools learn to, share their learning among themselves rather, and scale up successful approaches that are innovated and created at the community level. Dan O'Hara will talk about that as we go to discussion. Another thing that we can do, which is very important, so moving on to another form of action, is breaking the silence of silent majorities. Majorities are concerned that climate breakdown, inequality, and other threats will lead to societal collapse. Majorities disagree with their society's values, think that we're too divided and want systemic change. However, they also feel that their own views are marginal because they're taboo. These sorts of views have been growing while they've been taboo to express. Is it possible to make each other feel the reality that when we go to a Tesco, a supermarket, most of the people in line with us silently feel like this? The most successful media campaigns in history are the ones that made majorities aware of themselves. That's what #MeToo did. That's what early trade unionism even did. When this majority feels its own numbers and its own power, then it will feel like it's not on the fringes anymore, but it's the political center. New political dreams can take hold and replace ailing institutions. Even business leaders, especially insurers, privately acknowledge that a hopeful future requires new economic rules. The CMP has incubated an initiative called the Transition Lobby, which builds safe spaces for business people to advocate for systemic change, treating climate reality with the same rigor expected in financial risk assessment. Joe Alexander, who spent years in BP advocating for change, is here to talk about her experiences in that demographic and how to raise the visibility of that silent majority. And finally, what about global ambitions? What can the UK do globally to help? A self-aware majority in the UK could drive the UK to use its outsized global voice to call attention globally to uncomfortable truths. The need for adaptation is one, but another is that official rhetoric worldwide has tried to tell people what they need to hear rather than finding ways for humanity to hear the threat and turn it into motivation. International diplomatic processes like COP have never really had the power to deliver that much more than the paper pledges that we've gotten. And we tend to give a false sense of security by treating carbon capture as a genuine option rather than speculation. People worldwide actually want to sacrifice in order to respond to climate chaos, but only if others do too. The institutions that are supposed to make those types of agreements happen are not fit for purpose. The UK doesn't have to say this alone, and in fact, it'd be more effective if it mostly amplified the voices of the people who have the most at stake from the failure of international agreements. Carolyn Mair-Toby, director of the Institute for Small Islands, who is here in Tobago. So in conclusion, emergency mobilization will come when the majority on the margins becomes a self-aware political force. So imagine again that the actions sketched here are combining adaptation, emotionally literate education, campaigns that awaken collective efficacy, and a call for new international institutions had actually taken place this year because of concerted organization. Also ask yourself, how impossible are any of these things to organize? how radically different would we feel right now? So that's it for me. Back to the panel to discuss the actions that we've highlighted.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Liam. And your the quality was great until the end. I don't mean your quality. I mean the quality of the internet. I know you were worried about it, but we got to just a few moments before the very end. That was fantastic. Thank you. So now we have three wonderful guests who are going to respond to what they've heard. And let me just tell you who we have with us on the call. Jo Alexander is a chartered geologist. She is a former BP employee and a climate campaigner. And she's going to talk about how we make the majority visible, using the example of some in the business community who are concerned, but who are, at the moment at least, largely invisible. And then we will hear from Caroline Mair-Toby, who is a public international law attorney, specializing in climate and environmental justice, in Indigenous rights and small islands. And she'll be focusing on the inadequacy of existing institutions to arrive at global agreements that protect future generations. And I've seen several people raising those concerns in the chat as Liam was speaking. And then finally, we'll hear from Dr. Dan O'Hare, educational psychologist and senior lecturer at the University of Bristol, who will talk about the role of education in lighting the way for wider society. And these are all themes that have been picked out in the report and which I can see also being discussed in the chat. So each of you three lovely panelists have an absolute maximum of 10 minutes, but if you can come in at 7 minutes, we will be even more happy, because then there's a bit of chance of some conversation between the three of you. But let me hand the floor now straight away to Jo, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. I want to share my experience of being in BP. I've been at that company twice now. And it really illustrates, I think, what Liam was talking about the silent majority, and my observation that there are a lot of people, even in oil companies, of course, who care deeply about the climate crisis, but for various reasons stay silent. I suppose there is a challenging question about how do you help those people voice their concerns, and maybe we'll get to that in the discussion. But also some of what I have to say is illustrative of processing emotions that arise, particularly what I've learned from grief, because I had a particularly grief-filled year. So I'll give you a bit of background as to the kind of BP experience. I mean, I went back to BP in 2020 after some AGM activism, meeting the boss, telling him what I thought, and then learning that the company was going to go on a journey of really trying to decarbonize its portfolio, and which was really quite a serious strategy that was announced like in early 2020. I suppose I was there for 3 years. I could kind of see the wheels coming off early on, but at the February 2023, they announced a rollback in one of the most important climate targets that the company had. It said it was going to reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2030, and at that point it was rolling them back to 20 to 25%, and now that doesn't even exist. So a desire to reduce its scope 3 emissions was fairly ambitious, most ambitious in the sector, and now it's gone. So that was a very bruising experience for me as someone who's trying to create change from the inside. I suppose I learned that you can't make systemic change from inside a hierarchical, profit-driven company. Kind of seems obvious to say it now, but back in 2020, a lot of people felt that, using the scale and power of an organization like BP to create change had some real potential. So that's kind of the background. And so I think I just want to relate that experience to grief. And then I'll go on and talk about my observation of the silent majority. So it was really serendipitous that my father died at basically the same time that BP rolled back on its climate target. And it was a very traumatic experience. And I would find myself asking the question of like how much of the way that I'm feeling, the grief that I'm feeling, is to do with my dad, and how much is to do with what the company's doing. Like, it was obviously mostly to do with my dad, but it was the wrong question. Like, I don't think you can apportion up grief like that. And what happened was, like, one amplified the other. And I learned that, like, grief connected me deeply to how I felt. It amplified it. It meant my anger, I just, like, couldn't help but express it. So I found myself in a situation where, like, I was expressing my anger. I really was letting people know how I felt. Lots of tears, lots of difficult questions directed at the leaders. And I felt that everyone else was busy trying to be professional. So whilst I felt like a fish out of water, I think people appreciated my honesty and no one told me not to express myself. So it was a very interesting experience. I don't know, I've learned a lot from it. It wasn't a fun experience. And I suppose grief also helped me, I don't know, it helped me in a lot of ways. Maybe we'll come back to it. It feels quite hard to summarize, but it amplified my emotions and it helped me. I think the other thing was it made me realize that I was really holding on to this story about how BP could be an important leader in the energy transition. And I knew I was holding on to that story too tight and I couldn't let it go. And I found myself on a retreat asking Mac McCartney at 𝗨𝗪𝗂𝗀𝗀, a wonderful place, what happens beyond, like, what happens if I let go of hope? Because I realized I was so scared of what lay beyond it, because I didn't want to go into, like, despair and depression, which I'd already started to experience. And I realized that I could go into it. I could let go of hope. I could feel the depression and I could come back out of the other side. Anyway, I've only got a few minutes left. So then I'll spend the rest of the time talking about my observations of the silent majority that I felt I saw. So I'll talk about leaders first, because what was really interesting about talking to the leaders of BP was privately they'd say one thing to me and publicly they'd say another. So privately, they would kind of acknowledge that they knew that businesses couldn't act alone. Acting alone, business can't fully decarbonize and remain profitable. Like, they realized they'd hit up against this economic reality, and even though they wanted to transform the company, the high oil price and investor demands meant that they just couldn't do it. And I would ask them, like, why don't you use this moment in time to talk about, why this company wanted to transform and the barriers that it's up against, and that it, if we want to go as fast as society needs, then we're going to need more support from policy and investor. Like, why don't we say that? And then they would say, well, maybe we can't say that because we're trying to inspire confidence in the investors. So the company wants to sell this idea that it can transform and be profitable at the same time. So that was kind of where the silence comes in. Like, they'll privately acknowledge what the problem with the economic system is, but publicly they can't say it and they can't ask for help. And then the other kind of cohort of people is, like, all the other employees, which I think split into lots of persona groups, of course, but those people really care. Well, a lot of them really care deeply about climate. And then when BP tried to transform, they would talk about how brilliant it was. And there were lots of people really behind the transformation. But then as soon as the rollback started to happen, you noticed that they'd go really quiet. And I published a blog earlier this year about what I felt was happening at the company. And people would message me privately and say, look, I can't be seen to like your blog, but I really appreciate what you said. Other people would say to me, like, I've gone really quiet on LinkedIn. I'm not really sure why. I think that people are very worried about now speaking out about climate, which is different from a few years ago when they really felt emboldened and able to talk about it. What else would I say? I mean, the last thing I might end on, there are two things. One thing is that there are a lot of people leaving the oil and gas industry at the moment, and there's a campaign being launched called Life After Oil, where we're encouraging each other, people who've left the oil industry, to talk about why and make visible that kind of growing group of people who have abandoned the industry, because I think otherwise we stay invisible. And the other thing that maybe, if it's interesting to come up in the discussion, there's this shift that Liam talks about in his report of kind of, we need to go from being emotionally overwhelmed or numb to connecting to being motivated to do something because of the crisis, like the corporate culture keeps you in this kind of emotional overwhelm or numbness, because it's kind of complicated, but kind of the hierarchy keeps you in a victim mentality. It's quite individualistic, so you don't feel like you're with a group of people that you can do anything with. Whereas, action in community is something that feels like a big antidote for that. So I kind of love, and for me, the conclusion is get out of corporate culture, because you need to kind of become aware of what it's done to you and unlearn that. And I've done a lot of that. It's taken a long time to kind of heal from grief, but also kind of become aware of the impact that being there had on me. It's not all terrible, but it was pretty bad at the end. I'll leave it there. Thanks so much. Hopefully, I was kind of 8 minutes, I think.
That was brilliant, Jo. And even if it had been 18, I would have let you go on, because that was just so powerful. And as I was listening, it just struck me, as I'm sure it struck many others, that we so rarely hear that degree of candor and honesty and acknowledgement of the grief that we all carry. And yeah, there was a great bit that I just saw that Rupert put in the chat, where he picked up the quote that that you said someone said to you, "I can't be seen to like your blog, but I like your blog." It says that's the silent majority right there, and it needs to speak. And that's exactly what this whole session is about. How do we ensure that that silent majority is enabled to speak? So I hope you've seen all of the love that's been in the chat and in the hearts and so forth that have been coming up. Quite a few people asking where they can find your blog. I don't know if it's possible to stick that in as well.
I'll find the link.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Right, now we're going to move on to Caroline Mair-Toby, and we are so honoured to have Caroline with us this evening. And yeah, we really look forward to hearing your reflections. So the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. And I just want to take some time to hold space for your grief, Jo, because I too have felt that grief, that deeply existential grief, and it's not fun. And when you see it manifested into reality, it's not in your imagination. It's it's not a conspiracy theory. Oh my! You become, I think, nervous is an understatement. So I wanted to thank you all so much for being here, and to Caroline Lucas. My goodness, I almost cried when you said, we feel like we can respond when we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And I felt that because, yes, we need a community. I have felt fear. I have felt fear for speaking up. I am not connected to big anything. I am in a small island. I left London. I've always been working on climate, so everybody's been like, but, even down in a small island, working with Indigenous communities, I know I can be cut off from society. I know that I can be blackballed in society. I know that I can have trouble earning money. So it's real, This is what we're doing at the Institute for Small Islands. We are creating communities. We're working with Indigenous peoples, building their own governance structures, their own communities to speak back to international structures, but also to talk freely between generations and to get rid of shame and to get back into community. It's really, really important because they're taught self-loathing, they're taught shame, historically and now. So yes, local communities and traditional communities and allies for these communities. So I don't want to take up too much time, but yes. So what I also wanted to say that we are a majority. And I think this is what you were saying, Liam, I could be wrong. We are a global, no, this is Caroline still. We are a global majority. We are a majority. And I wanted to say, yes, this is what Indigenous and traditional peoples and peoples outside of the West refer to ourselves as. We are a global majority, because it's not to say like, we're more than you. It's to give ourselves confidence to talk about these issues that have been systemically retaliated against, sometimes with our lives, you know. They can shut you down. So I'm even shaky thinking about it, but I invite you to join us in the global majority. Join us as allies. You know, we are having these discussions. We have been having these discussions since we were in analog days, you know. But anyway, moving on. So this story, this is a story that we know all too well. This is a story of small islands and Indigenous people. Small islands have been quite vocal at the UNFCCC, and I've been lucky enough to be involved in that process since 2009. We've been quite vocal, and I don't think you guys actually know how much we have moved that and shifted that. Unless you've been involved in the UNFCCC negotiations, the climate negotiations, we have been there fighting that fight to move that needle and to change terms and gain recognition and get money for loss and damage and get money for adaptation. And it's been hard. It has been like pulling teeth. And now I don't have a speech. I'm speaking from, I have some notes here. So I'm just speaking from, so tell me when I'm up and I'll just stop speaking. Indigenous peoples, however, have no seats at the table. And I'm describing my lived and emotional journey right here. And so I got into the negotiations through think tanks and NGOs in London, and these are amazing allies. So that was Legal Response International. Christoph Schwartz was my director, and we were an amazing team on that. Field Foundation for International Environmental Law and Development. It was actually started by Philip Sands, but he was no longer there, and unfortunately it folded for lack of funding. It was ahead of its time, but he worked with Angela Cropper from Trinidad and Tobago, Small Islands negotiator at AOSIS, Alliance of Small Island States. Am I going too fast? Can you guys understand my accent? Great. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, good. And they were doing that in the 80s, you know, so there is so much room for allyship, and you guys are really doing the work, and I encourage you and invite you to do more work in terms of understanding the backstories, understanding what is at the other end of that supply chain, what is happening on the ground, because there are more than 3 massacres going on in the world. Sorry, can I speak about this? Let me know yes or no, I can shut up now. Yeah, okay, great. There's Haiti, there's the Amazon, there's Honduras, there's, you know, on this side of the world, there's one next door to me threatening right now in Venezuela. I'm in Trinidad and Tobago. I can see it from my mother's house. It's 11 kilometers away from where I am. So when I tell you that I'm nervous, I'm nervous. There are warships at my island, and I can't even say anything about this because I could be arrested. So I'm going to shut up now. Right. So going back to my lived and personal experience, I grew up with a very steady climate, you know. You could chart your calendar on this tiny, beautiful green island. It's in the mouth of the Orinoco River of Venezuela. We're an independent sovereign island. Trinidad and Tobago. Tobago is like your sun, sea, and sun. Trinidad is... We have a dry season and a wet season. I'm not going to wax rhapsodic about the beauty of my island. It's beautiful, right? We won't have any time. But I'm telling you this for a reason. We have a dry season and a wet season. You could literally chart your calendar. There was a 𝗵𝗃, which meant like a brief dry season in the middle of just the rainy season, and that was when planting was done. And that was just something that we all did at that time, and that everybody did at that time. So agricultural patterns have shifted now because 𝗍𝗏 is running wild. Sorry, I don't mean to panic people, but you know, we see it. We see, I don't know if you've noticed the craziness, but there are no seasons anymore. There's no rainy season or dry season. There's no trade winds anymore. We used to know where the rains came from. We used to know where the winds came from. All of these things. So I just wanted to highlight that point. We have been seeing the breakdown of the climate for a while. So when I started as a liaison officer and a lawyer with these think tanks, I thought I was doing something. I thought I was there. I'm like, nothing's being done. And we had to keep on agitating for inclusion of our issues. And it was just beating our head against a bloody brick wall. You know, you go there and it's the same paragraphs, it's the same issue over the same letters. Biz, ter, kata. Sorry, these are the, I see them in my sleep, in my nightmares now. These are the reformulations of the paragraphs under the text. And so, you know, this is one and this is the other one, this is the third version, that kind of stuff. Anyway, I've tried to step away from that world for a bit, and try to work more with communities on the ground. And so, like, stepping into this, my next point, why I boycotted 𝗨𝗃, Azerbaijan, and 𝗨𝗨𝗻. Now, I've been working on that since 2009, so that was the crux of my career. I had just represented my country for 2 years. And I have to go back because look at what just happened. You know, just now, do you know what happened there? Do you know what happened at 𝗨𝗃? A traditional headdress of what we call a 𝗨𝗃𝗀𝗃, a spiritual leader, was ripped off at 𝗨𝗃 by a security guard. That is so much disrespect. That's like ripping off your Pope's headdress. You know what I'm saying? Every indigenous person around the world who saw that, they were like, oh. You know what I mean? It's a spiritual thing. So when somebody, it's a symbol of leadership, it's a symbol of spirituality, it's a symbol of protection when somebody who isn't authorized to touch it. You know, so there's all of that. And then furthermore, it's the issue of just being in Brazil. It's where people think of it, of indigenous. You know, you think of Brazil, you think of indigenous peoples in the Amazon. I do, well, maybe I do, but for me, it's almost synonymous with these amazing communities that are still there. Like Trinidad has been so urbanized. There's no forest to run to. There's a rainforest, but we're tiny. You know what I mean? And these people, these communities who have been keeping it together, they've been keeping it together at great expense, influenced by the church, influenced by the church. So we see them as like these almost pure states. And we know that, you know, they've been influenced and everything like that. But for us, that's really important. And they're not allowed at the table. They don't have a seat at the table, and you're in 𝗨𝗻𝗻. You can't even give them an honorary seat. Like, what is that about? You know, the issue of territorial protection, the issue of inaction, the issue of government policies. I mean, I encourage you to go and research why. I don't have enough time. I have it all listed here. I'm not going to go into that. I encourage you to go and research why they protested. Go to 𝗏𝗂𝗰 Bay and see why they protested. I'm going to write an article about it soon, and I'll send it to you, Liam, and you can understand. So these are very, very real issues. They had a whole flotilla that came down the river to like go there. It was a huge deal that the 𝗨𝗃 was going to be there, and they thought they were going to be listened to. And then they were stopped. They were blocked from entering. That's a slap in the face. And this is why, you know, it's the inadequacy of existing institutions. You know, my former director kept on telling me, you know, it's the only donkey getting us there. Because I would complain and he would complain, and we'd just be shattered at the end of every 𝗨𝗃. And he would say, it's the only donkey getting us there. And I'm like, no, it doesn't need to be. We need to have more donkeys. Like, this is why we are doing at the Institute what we're doing. We're working on local, regional, and international councils to be able to train our youth to speak out and also host their own things. You know, this is not a game for us. This is death. You know, and it's not just climate, it's everything that they are dealing with. It's timber, it's farming, it's agriculture, it's mining, it's the miners raping their daughters when they move in, it's the children moving out because they can't. I had to sit down and watch. This is when I decided to boycott. I had to sit down and watch an indigenous elder from Russia cry on the stage. This is at Egypt, I think. They all blurred together in my head. Cry on the stage because he's like, there's no food left in the tundra, there's no food left in the forest, the kids have to leave or they have to work as maids, and then that's when the sexual harassment starts and the rape. And then he started to cry, and we all awkwardly started to cry with him, because what do you do? And we're up there at the top, you know, in previous 𝗨𝗃s, the civil societies all together, but they're separating us now. And civil society being together means that you make contracts, you make trades, you make, connections. You separate us out, and we can't do that. And so we're there at the top speaking to ourselves. Nobody's listening to this. It goes nowhere. We all know it. You all don't hear it. You know what I mean?
We do know what you mean, Caroline. I feel terrible asking you to wind up, because what you're saying is so powerful and so direct and so raw, and we don't hear that directness, I think, nearly often enough. So thank you so much, and I hope we can have more of a conversation once I've let Dan into the conversation as well. But I just feel that, as so often, I think you've just demonstrated, there is so much for us to learn from the approach in the Global South, where you have known for so long that you are a majority, and naming that and acting in that way and being seen in that way and being given the respect for that is still something that you're having to fight for every single day. And I think you've given us such a powerful insight into what that feels like, and the emotion of what it feels like, not how one talks about it, but just the feeling, I think, has just been, well, you can see from people's responses, it's just been so hard hitting. So thank you. Finally, I'm going to hand the floor to
thank you
again, Caroline, to Dan O'Hare, the educational psychologist, lecturer, senior lecturer at University of Bristol, to talk a bit about education at this point. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Caroline. We're going to speak, or I'm going to speak certainly in this part, about emotions, and that's something that's come up a lot in the chat, and certainly something that Joe and Caroline have talked about in the previous two responses. And to some extent, I feel I have the perhaps easier task, in that children and young people have demonstrated over a number of years now that they are not silent or willing to be silent in the face of this crisis. What I want to say to start out is that I don't think it's an understatement to say that perhaps the most severe and enduring macrosystemic influence on children's development now and into the future will be the state of the planet's climate and how we adapt or otherwise to that state. And that's why I want to start with kind of thinking about the lived reality, not policy, the lived reality for children and young people. And I guess what we already know in the room. So young people are growing up knowing that the climate is breaking down. But in schools and in our education system, on the whole, I guess we act as if that knowledge, that understanding isn't there. Many students and young people are already worried, angry, numb. The IPCC has discussed multiple times, children experiencing feelings of hopelessness, apocalyptic feelings, grief. Grief is something that's come up already. Grief for the unanticipatory losses that will come in the future, whether that be around nature or ecological destruction. The lived reality is that climate breakdown is affecting children in communities here in the UK also now, but it's not affecting children and families equally. Global analysis demonstrates that children from poorer and global majority families suffer greater impacts due to climate breakdown and climate related hazards and events. And that's the case, for example, in the UK, in our urban centres and our cities, where before mid-July this year, we had 3 heat waves. Young people living in poor quality housing, in poorer areas, in overcrowded housing are experiencing the effects of those heat waves now. That influences memory, learning, relationships, attention, sleep, all relevant to children's success, achievement in school. Many teachers, I think, also feel morally conflicted, teaching as if the future is stable. And I guess to say this is that this isn't a failure of young people. I think what we're talking about here is a support gap. So when we talk about action for the majority, my hope is that education is one of those places where action either becomes possible or gets quietly shut down. So what does action look like in education? What does it actually mean? Action in education cannot crucially be just about more information. It's about telling truth and helping people, children, young people, and the adults around them to understand, process, and cope with that truth. And I think there are hopefully 2 strands to that. Firstly, a curriculum that reflects reality, and then a curriculum that supports agency, not paralysis. So I focus on that first bit, curriculum that reflects reality. This is what young people are telling us they want. In the chat several times, people have highlighted the work of organisations led by and for young people. For example, Teach the Future. They are saying that they need a curriculum that teaches and reflects the reality of the world around them. A couple of years ago, the Children's Commissioner in England carried out something called the Big Ask and asked 500,000 children what matters to them most. The big answer, a year later, where they analysed those findings, demonstrated that overwhelmingly the planet and children's environment was key to their hopes, and thoughts about the future. So a curriculum that reflects reality would see climate and the environment and our ecological situation as a through line throughout all aspects of the curriculum, not simply a bolt-on, i.e. it doesn't just simply appear across the sciences, but as Caroline Lucas suggested earlier, it's also in the humanities, ethics, history, maths, art, drama. This allows, I would think, a focus on uncertainty, risk, but also collective responses, and to understand and to analyze past moments of rapid change. We've seen that around the world in the last 5 years as well, since 2020. I think there is some promise when we think about a curriculum that reflects reality, from the recent curriculum and assessment review that the Department for Education published. So within that review document, there's a section called Preparing Learners for a Changing World. There's a subsection in there that talks about climate change and sustainability. And I just want to read a quote from that section. It is crucial that young people benefit from an understanding of the climate crisis's cause, consequences, and possible solutions, and that they are empowered with the necessary knowledge and skills to thrive in tomorrow's industries and tackle the serious challenges facing our planet. This is great. The fact that it's there in a government document and there's a focus on climate and sustainability. But I think to focus solely on knowledge and skills is a missed opportunity, and I hope to kind of talk about why I think that's the case and what we could be doing. So if the curriculum implies that the future will look like the past, I just think young people will stop trusting what they've been taught, and I think we see the effects of that already. So the second strand is this idea that a curriculum that supports agency, not paralysis. Information within a curriculum without emotional framing can increase distress, distrust, hopelessness. And I think schools are very good sometimes at teaching the problem better than the response. So action within a curriculum that support agency could look like naming emotions as a reasonable response to this overwhelming situation, emphasizing collective action over individual kind of perfection or pursuits and actions that we can take. I think this would also link learning, explicit, crystallized learning, to things like adaptation, care, repair, community resilience. What does it look like to act as a community? Ultimately, the aim would be that education shouldn't leave young people better informed, but feeling more alone. I think that would be the kind of the antithesis to what we're going for. Central, though, I think to this is I guess the missing infrastructure, and that's the emotional support. This is a kind of what I want to focus on for the next few minutes. The emotional truth, as we've already said, is that children are experiencing a range of emotions about our degrading climate, biodiversity loss, loss of access to natural spaces, whether that be climate anxiety, whatever we're calling it, eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, anger at adults, so a sense of betrayal and intergenerational distrust, i.e. they cannot trust us as adults and the people who should have safeguarded them. They cannot trust us again on our word to do what we say we might do. Joe talked earlier about commitments that are rolled back slowly until they disappear. Disrupted relational connections as well, even within families. This is certainly something I've seen in work. I think children and young people have that sense of disengagement, fatalism. But I think also there's this aspect of staff within our educational institutions experiencing burnout, avoidance, uncertainty about what to do with this. None of these are disorders. These are rational responses to a frightening situation. That's why I think if we're thinking about action within the education system, staff support comes first. This is often neglected. Schools can't support young people emotionally if staff are not supported to face this themselves. In my own practice, I have been involved with a school who wanted my support for a young child who was not attending school. So the presenting problem was not attending. Once I'd been involved and met the young person, what became clear to me is this young person did not want to go to school because they didn't want to drive half an hour each way and therefore be responsible for the carbon emissions of their mum driving them to school. Really difficult for me to talk about, really difficult for the staff to talk about as well. Staff responses and reactions ranged from denial and ignoring that as an issue through to kind of uncertainty and helplessness about how to support that young person, which is why staff support needs to come first. That can include training in climate aware kind of pastoral conversations, space for staff that acknowledge uncertainty. My colleague Louise Edgington, for example, runs staff climate cafes in schools where teachers can bring these thoughts and feelings. Leadership that allows, I guess, climate reality to be named within school systems. Sustainability leads, something that the DFE has advocated for, the Department for Education, but actually funding that role, protecting that time, ensuring that ensuring that sustainability leads have access and a place on school leadership teams. We can't ask teachers to hold students' fear if they're not allowed to acknowledge their own. So when we talk about support for students, I think there can sometimes be a pushback, and certainly in my role, I've experienced a pushback from teachers and school staff who say school isn't therapy. And I totally agree. When we're talking about support for students, this is not therapy. What it is equipping and skilling up school staff to have structured, containing conversations with children and young people, to develop a shared emotional language, even within the local area. I've done work with whole schools where the whole school has developed a shared emotional language around anxiety so that they can talk to the children in the same way that the children are talking. We could do that when we're thinking about climate. Clear pathways that kind of help children and communities understand moving from kind of concern through to contribution. And a focus on avoiding guilt and perfectionism. You know, the Australian Psychological Society was very clear about warning against the potential for kind of overburdening children and young people with a focus on individual action. So support isn't about making young people feel less afraid. I guess it's about ensuring that we're not leaving them alone with that fear. And I think this is where, you know, I've recently started working with the Climate Courage campaign from the Climate Majority Project. And this is how we kind of think about courage within schools. What is courage? It's not stoicism. It's not false optimism, but instead it's being prepared to tell the truth age appropriately. For us as educationalists, teachers, head teachers, to model emotional honesty and accept that discomfort, I guess, as part of the learning experience. I guess there's also a call there then to act together despite uncertainty. Courage in schools means facing reality together and not pretending it isn't happening. So if we want a climate majority that can act, schools have to be places where people learn that their fear is shared, their concern is normal, and action is and should be collective. Young people don't need to protect them from the truth. They need us to stand with them in it and act as if their future matters, which is something, as people have pointed out throughout the chat, that young people have been calling for 10 years now.
Lovely.
That's me.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Dan. That was so powerful. And yeah, how did it become radical to ask that a curriculum reflects reality? And it's just an extraordinary situation that we're in now. But that was a wonderful way of rounding off our third intervention. Thank you so much. So now there is an opportunity to put some questions, or actually just some reflections too. I personally don't always like it when you have to turn something into a question when actually you just want to share a reflection. So I've picked up a few that are in the chat already. And so maybe we'll just start off with these three, and I will put them to our panel and to Liam if he would like to respond as well. But in the meantime, either do put any more thoughts you might have in the chat, or do just raise your electronic hand, because we have the this kind of space until 7 o'clock, so we have a good 20 minutes. So the three that I've just picked out of the chat already, and maybe if any of our panel would like to respond to any of them, even though, and when I say this, I know that some people have been doing some responses in the chat as well. But there was a question from another Caroline saying, can you give more examples of what local communities can actually do in response to this to this session that we've just been sharing? Another sort of question around, what about the enormous power of the fossil fuel companies, the big agricultural lobbyists at COP and indeed elsewhere, I dare say, that was from HP. And then specifically on education, a question from Louisa Radice saying, is there a risk that targeting young people will delay real action? Because by definition, young people are not going to be able to make a sort of a lasting difference until they're a bit older. So I'm going to come in order. Actually, I'm going to leave Liam till last, just because we'll go to our presenters first, and then Liam can round up. So, Jo, any thoughts about any of those 3 points, about local communities, about the power of the big corporations, which is your specialist subject, and about the risk of targeting young people too soon?
What was the question about power of fossil fuel companies exactly? Or shall I just riff?
Well, I mean, the question was framed very specifically about the fact that they have such access at meetings like COP30, and you know, how realistic would it be, I guess, I'm extemporizing here, to ban them completely, or any other thoughts about how we can contain their power in some way?
There's somebody there.
I don't know if I have the answer, but it does remind me of seeing politicians on Question Time say, oh, don't, you know, kind of this, telling the audience not to worry too much because business has a plan to get to net zero. And it just strikes me to the heart with fear, because I don't know if they really believe that that's true, that business has a plan and it's going to do it, or whether they know that's not true and they're just misleading us. I don't really know. And I do know senior other politicians who seem to really believe in it, and they seem to think, well, it's just that business leaders should have more courage and then it'll be okay. But it completely misunderstands what the depth of the problem is. Like, the whole economic system is designed around growth and profit maximization, and as long as that is the case, everything else will be less of a priority. So I just think, I suppose we have a responsibility as the electorate to kind of build a movement to say that we recognize that that idea that we could trust in business now is gone. And we don't expect politicians to be telling us that we should trust them. That feels like one thing that we really need to figure out how to do. I mean, yeah, they do have so much power, and it needs to be limited. We need politicians' help, and we need, I suppose we have consumer power, but citizen power is probably more where it's at. I'll just leave it there, but it's a big question, isn't it?
Well, it is, and if we all had the answers, we'd be going out and doing it. So that's why I don't like questions so much. I think reflections are a good thing to have. Caroline, any thoughts about any of the 3 points?
Okay, give me one more time, really quickly, because I've just listened to Jo and now absorbed her.
What can local communities actually do? What about the power? How do we contain some of the power of these big corporations? And is there a risk that targeting young people will delay action because young people can't necessarily act for some time? Is what the questioner said? One can challenge that if one wishes to.
All right. One, I can answer all of those very quickly. Local communities. Local communities can do so much. You have no idea. Local communities can soothe you. They can hold you. They can provide space. They can provide protection. They can provide healing. They can provide spirituality. And right now, in this siloed age of internet and, you know, not talking to each other, that's important. So even online communities right now, I would encourage, if it's hard for you to get out and about, get in there. I've made a beautiful community on LinkedIn that has encouraged me to speak up, and I am continuing that on the ground here. For Indigenous communities, it has created protection. Those are nations, so they're not voluntary communities, but I can see the effect of it against a larger matrix of, I mean, it's either colonial or neo-colonial settler frameworks. And they pass on history. This is really important in this time of information challenges right now. Disinformation is vast. And then also issues of, so right now there is a flowering and a renaissance of Indigenous spiritual history and culture, and most importantly, the recognition of Indigenous environmental knowledge. That has been tried, people have been trying to smash that for centuries. And so they've been, the vastness of Indigenous scientific knowledge and the fact that so much of Western history is predicated on it. All of your big pharma knowledge is predicated on Indigenous scientific knowledge. So these communities have been crucibles that have protected that knowledge through the elders, through the transmission of culture. So my encouragement is to go analog again, go even before analog. Talk to your elders, talk to your children. I grew up in a huge family. My mother had 60 first cousins. That's not an exaggeration. And I grew up not watching TV. I grew up reading books, talking to my grandmother. I'm literally one of the last knowledge holders of my family because of that. And I would have been gone from this if I hadn't sat down. And my mother made me take care of my grandmother. I was with her when she died. I took care of her. I changed her diapers. I bathed her. I'm sure she's mortified that I'm talking about this right here next to me. And yes, our ancestors are in this realm with us, and your ancestors are there too. So start talking to them, and they will guide you to what you should do, where your history is, who you should talk to, and then encourage intergenerational conversations. And Dan, I absolutely love that you're talking about young children. I'm going to jump to that quickly, and I'm just going to add the other one. Oh, how to confront power. How can you take them out? They're there. They're never going to go away. They're never going to go away. They're going to get into every single thing. They are going to espionage is huge. Corporate espionage is huge. So you can't. You just have to keep on doing it. I mean, yeah, sure, kick them out. They'll be there. Is there a risk? Okay, what can you do to deal with that? Communities, councils, do your own thing, do your own organization, start at the ground, build up and connect to other organizations, and then connect to other countries, and then connect in a board internationally. Okay, that's what you do. Right. Women do this really well. Because we know how to link. Is there a risk of involving young children? I think there's a risk of not involving young children, because right now there is a risk of all of this knowledge, all of this awakening. This is what they're saying woke is just we awakening to truth. That's it. There's nothing spiritual about this. We're just reading, and we have more access to knowledge because social media has given us all a voice. All right, there we go. So we we need to transmit this culture, because all of this has been online. They are now surveilling online. The human built online is gone. All right, this is all surveillance from now on. Let me know if I can share something or read something with you afterwards. I'm sure I'm out of time, but I can tell you what's going to happen down the line, because this has happened to us before. This has never stopped happening to small islands, indigenous peoples, just ever. I yield the floor.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I wish we had another 3 hours. I could listen to you. Well, all of you. It's so powerful. Dan, any responses?
Yes, there's been so many examples in the chat of what community action looks like. I think so many people have shared, what they're doing. Somebody talked about, I think it was in Durham, they're off to start running now their grandparent climate action concern group that they run. And so, the chat is a great example. But I think, if I'm focusing particularly on schools have, so recently, in the recent past, the Department for Education kind of published its sustainability and climate change strategy. And one of the things that they suggested in there was that schools, well, by September just gone, all schools will have had to have a climate action plan. And as you might expect, the creativity and wonderfulness of schools have gone far beyond what the document suggests. And many schools have leaned into this role of becoming kind of climate hubs within their community. That's changes to school buildings. It's changes to the way schools are organized. It's changes to the way the curriculum is delivered. It's the setting up of groups, gardening groups that not only involve the children in the school, but also the group that run the local allotment. There's so many examples where schools have become community hubs and demonstrated what it means to bring people together. One of the other points that somebody raised was, is it too much to expect children to do this, and because they won't be able to act for some time? I completely agree. We can't expect children to kind of, for this to completely rest on children's shoulders. And Caroline and I think I talked about it earlier about this being an intergenerational issue, that there's been a rupture in the intergenerational relations, i.e. children are looking at us thinking, you can't be trusted. You have allowed it to get to this stage. So I'm definitely for the idea of older generations coming alongside children and young people, but there's work around rebuilding trust there that needs to happen first. So I'm not going to go into the psychology of attachment theory and what happens when relations are disrupted like that. But there needs to be work around building trust, but also even on kind of like a kind of a dynamic, an interactional, relational dynamic. I'm aware of research. I think it was Lawson in 2019 demonstrated that children can foster climate change concern in their parents, which is great. You know, this multi-pronged approach is, I guess, what we're arguing for. It wouldn't just be expecting children to do this. And lo and behold, maybe we should hear from this young person. What perfect timing.
Beautiful. Thank you. We are beginning to be a bit short of time now, so I will just take another few questions, but if we can have really short answers and maybe just answer one of them each, and I'll just let you decide which ones feel most resonant to you. And there have been so many now in the chat. I do hope we are going to save the chat because it's fantastic. So much richness there. So one point from HP was among young people there is anger and depression and sadness, and the arts are so important, I feel, to try and express and address these through music and poetry and painting and improvisation of all kinds, including theatre. What do the panel think about the role of the arts? Then from Irene, would making visible with maps and stories on maps about how many people and organisations are already acting lead more people in turn to also act, because they would then see visually that they are part of something bigger? And then a question from Tim, do we really think that our politicians and policymakers really do understand the reality of climate breakdown and its consequences? So any of those you might like to quickly respond to, and then I'm going to come to Liam to begin to round up. Jo, are you happy to go again? Sorry, is that all right?
Absolutely, great questions. Creativity and arts expression, that has been super important as I've gone through a bit of a healing journey. So writing for catharsis, and there's my therapist reacted when I said, I'm trying to figure things out. He said, well, maybe you need to feel things out, and realizing how slow that is, how much time you need to take, and how much different forms of expression can help. And I found even making things like jewelry or just anything creative it just feels like you have a level of control, and you're making something beautiful, and there's something about that sends lovely signals to your brain. And I do love the idea of maps. Yes, if anyone wants to work on maps, as a geologist, I'm totally into them. The power of an image, 1,000 words.
Thank you. Caroline?
Oh, no. I was just saying, yeah, I want to work on maps too.
No, but it was your turn.
Oh, sorry. I got excited
if you'd
about
like
maps.
to. You don't have to take it, but just in case.
Is this last words?
This is just any responses to the 3 points around the role of the arts, around the idea of maps as a way of demonstrating who's already active and therefore giving other people more confidence to be active. And then the third one was around, do we think that our politicians and policymakers really do understand the reality of climate breakdown and its consequences? So choose one of those and you've got a minute.
I think arts is really important because this is all this is. It's stories, it's storytelling. I apologize. They managed to break in and I can't close the door now. So I think that is also what encourages the layperson to no. Go on, close the door, please. That encourages the layperson to engage and to connect on an emotional level, because emotion is really how you're going to get people. You're not going to get people with only money at the end of the day. When emotion comes in, when people are dying, when, yes, needs are important, but when there's a hurricane bearing down on Westmoreland in Jamaica, and somebody looks outside the door, I think, the window or something like that, and she says she feels that she's in the middle of a blender, high-speed blender. What is money then? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is money then? Arts, you need stories, you need love, you need emotion, you need community. Art builds community.
Lovely. Thank you. Dan?
Yeah. I was just reflecting on, some of the most powerful experiences around climate crisis and lack of action that I've experienced have been in the theatre, watching kind of eco-oriented dramas, and I'm kind of big into sort of 𝗨𝗪, climate sci-fi, that kind of the expressiveness that can come from that. And I guess there's a psychological element to that as well, that as Joe talked about, the ways that we process different experiences, we process things differently through art, through music, through singing, through drama. These can also be excellent collective activities. So, moving from kind of individualistic approaches to collective communal approaches. So I was heartened recently when the curriculum and assessment review was published, and it said something like, the national curriculum was never intended to take up the whole school day. Great. I'm really keen to see what comes of that. But I guess there is some commitment to recognizing the importance of what the government are calling, enrichment activities. But I think if we're thinking about, not just privileging one type of knowledge, we need to kind of commit to welcoming and expanding the forms through which knowledge is expressed and known. And that isn't just through, the kind of positivist, Eurocentric approach that has dominated our curriculum for decades.
Thank you, Dan. Liam, I don't envy you, because this is your moment to have a quick response to the extraordinary breadth and depth and richness and beauty of what you have heard. But if in a couple of minutes you are able to offer some reflections, that would be wonderful. And then I'll go to Rupert and Ed very briefly.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say quickly, I think on the questions on business and education are really important. First of all, on education, why is it so important? Basically, it's really, education is about values, right? What do we actually believe in? Are we going to actually education is about preparing children for the future, young people for the future. There's a responsibility to give people preparation. And it's an incredibly profound morally area. And so a kind of a struggle within education where there's already so much organization to make change. It's going to be highly socially visible and really force people to consider what do we actually believe in a way that you can't miss, right? And so I think that's part of the reason for why education, because people say, well, it's going to be several years down the road. The other thing, of course, is one of the issues with the climate movement is trying to get it all back at once. I make this kind of analogy sometimes with a football team that's down by about 6 goals, right? And you can start panicking and kicking the ball straight towards the goal, right? The most direct line, rather than keeping calm and moving forward and accepting that, it's still a bit of a longer slog than we want, right? What actually kids get taught in education today probably will in the end matter, right? Those people probably will still be struggling by the time they reach into adulthood in a meaningful way. And sometimes, I wonder if we're not being overly optimistic in a way, where we're missing something. We say, what about education? The other thing to mention is that whenever you look at these kind of classroom interventions, the action part, we say that we don't want, we shouldn't ask too much of children. It's always the young people that put the action part back into psychological interventions, right? They always ask for it, right? Adults take it out, and then kids put it back in. And it's been my consistent experience, right? And then the other thing about businesses, I just totally, just echoing Joe on this, Westerners are so brainwashed to believe, and especially people in Anglophone countries are so brainwashed to believe that markets are going to pay you to do valuable things. I think even people who think that they're past this, they still we're going to get paid money to challenge capitalism. Somehow, some way, there's some way to get the market to pay you for disassembling it. No, there isn't actually. There isn't probably way to get paid very well, to get paid extractive economy wages to disassemble the extractive economy, right? And the assumption that's possible is a real deep problem, right? And if you actually understand what corporations are and how little they care about humanity, then you understood a lot. And if we could actually spread that, and we'd get somewhere, right? And so there's a difference between business people and businesses. The people who are inside these corporate structures are not going to advocate for change. They have very different feelings than what their companies will advocate for. So that's the other thing, is make a big distinction between people and the structures they're attached between in right? And then we can talk about the whole thing with more clarity. So that's just it for me on the clarifications. And
thank you so much. Thank you, Liam. And I do apologize to people because we are running very, very slightly over. We're very nearly finished, but I do see that Caroline has a hand up, and I would like to honor her hand.
I'm so sorry. Two very quick points. Direct access funding for Indigenous peoples is very important because a lot of pretendians access that funding and use it for ill use. Another thing is, just to respond, kids talking to elders. Yes, I completely agree with, was it Dan who responded? Yes. I think I'm talking to the global majority. I'm talking to the people whose cultures are disappearing. So like in my countries, they need to talk to their elders. They need to get that knowledge. Sorry, go ahead.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Caroline. I was down to make some closing comments, but I will just simply say that this has been an extraordinary evening, and I hope you feel that too. And I just wanted to pick out a couple of things that really resonated with me. Someone called 𝗨𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗀 in the chat said, "I'm not sure our narratives are working right now in the UK. We need more honesty and real engagement." And I think that's what we've really had this evening. It's just been transformative. I think it's been extraordinary. And I couldn't agree more that those narratives do need to change. And Joe rightly challenges me somewhat in the chat too, saying, well, what do you think about whether politicians really understand the real nature of what we face? And my answer to that would be, no, I don't think they do. And that's partly because even when we have scientists and experts come to give evidence in our select committees and in these other august bodies, I feel that they are already kind of censoring what they're going to tell us. They are already filtering it through their understanding of what they think is going to be politically acceptable. And they don't want to look as if they are somehow, being right out there. And so politicians are not getting it. But do you know what? I also kind of feel that even if they did hear it, because we haven't got all of these other things that we've been talking about tonight, in other words, the holding of it and enabling them to come to terms with what it actually means, perhaps it wouldn't make any difference anyway. So I guess the kind of theme from tonight is that, yes, information is important, accurate, truthful, honest information is important, but it's not enough unless we have all of the arts and the imagination and the ancestors and the love and the relationships and the community and everything else that we've been talking about tonight. And I just wanted to say, Joe, I loved this thing that I think your therapist said about, you were saying you needed more time to figure things out. And I think your therapist said, no, we need to feel things out. That is my takeaway from tonight. So thank you so much. Two more very quick things. I'm going to hand the floor to Rupert to wind up, and then I think he is going to hand the floor in turn to Ed, who's going to tell us something we can all do. Rupert.
Caroline, thanks for being a splendid chair as ever this evening. Now over to Ed Jarvis, campaign manager for 𝗨𝗪, who is going to give you a chance to take one very time-sensitive piece of action for the majority. We're talking about our petition, which only has another couple of weeks on it. Ed, over to you.
Thank you so much. What a fabulous conversation this has been this evening. So we've got a petition that's demanding the government funds a national strategic adaptation plan. So this would get funding right down into communities to do the kind of adaptation that the real decarbonising, nature-focused adaptation. We're also looking for volunteers across a number of different areas. So representing your region or your community and being an advocate for adaptation. We've got some work around mapping. Any great examples that you've got of adaptation are really helpful as well. And also just any ideas you've got to help us get beyond the usual suspects, get to the climate majority and mobilise more action around the kind of things we've been talking to this evening. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, everybody. We're 4 minutes over, but I think it's been worth it. Do save the chat if you wish to. We will be circulating the recording. I'm going to wish you a Merry Christmas from the Climate Majority Project. Unfortunately, whether there is a Happy New Year is up to you. Good night, everybody.
And thank you again to our amazing speakers. Absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night. Thanks.